Hey there, welcome to JR Network Tech. I'm JR, and I'm coming at you with another Cisco how-to video. In this video, we're going to talk about how to configure an IP address on a Cisco router interface. Now, before we get started, I just want to let you know, please subscribe to this channel, especially if this is your first time here, and click that bell icon so that you can be notified of new content and you won't miss a single thing, I promise. Now, if you're an experienced engineer, you probably already know all about IP address communication, IP addresses. You can probably subnet in your sleep. But if you're a newer engineer, and especially if you're studying for one of those entry-level certifications, you probably just learned about networking fundamentals. You learned about IP communication. You learned about what IP addresses are, why they're necessary. You probably even did a little bit of binary to decimal conversion and back again. And you've finally conquered, at least you think you have, that monstrous subject that is subnetting. But now it's time to put your money where your mouth is. You actually have to configure an IP address on a router interface. Well, we're going to do that in this video. But before we get into the equipment, just a little word about what an IP address does for you. And this is going to be a vast oversimplification of this subject. I'm going to do my best to talk as little as possible. But think about sending a letter through the mail. Now you have a destination address that you put on the envelope or package, right? That's the place that you want the package to go to, the person you're sending it to. But imagine the post office required you for each package or letter that you send that you have to have a return address on that envelope. If you don't have that return address, they're not even going to deal with that package or envelope that you have. But in order to put a return address on an envelope, you actually have to have an address to put as a return address. You actually have to have an address from which you're sending this package. Well, router communication is somewhat the same way, especially when it comes to dealing with IP packets of information. Now, you have to have a destination IP address. So this is the address where your information is going to. But you also have to have a source IP address, which is the address of the device or interface that's actually sending that information. And when it comes to an IP address being noted as the source, that IP address has to actually exist, and it has to actually be configured on that device or interface. So that's what we're going to do today. But that's enough of me ranting about it. Let's get into the equipment and see what's really going on here. All right, now we're into our router that we have spun up here, NGNS3. And as you can see, it already has a hostname configured, router 1, or R1, we should say. And we're not going to go through that in this video. I actually have two very nice videos on how and why you configure host names on a Cisco device. So I'll leave the links to those videos in the description below. But for this video, we're going to talk about configuring an IP address on a router interface. So before we get into the actual configuration, we're going to go through two show commands to verify what's actually going on, and we'll be able to choose the interface that we're going to use. So the first show command we're going to use is we're going to use the show IP interface brief command, and this is going to show the IP characteristics of the interfaces that we have, and it's going to show a nice brief synopsis of what's going on. So let's go ahead and bring that up. And notice the columns that we have here. We have a column for the actual interface. We have a column for the IP address. We have a column for whether or not it's okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. The method of configuration, also the status, and the protocol. Now, we're not going to talk too much about these other categories in this video because this is only about configuring the IP address. But we're going to notice the IP address column. Now, notice that they all say unassigned. That means currently they do not have an IP address configured for these interfaces. So all these interfaces appear to be free to use. So we'll just go ahead and pick one here. Let's pick the first one, which is Gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So if that's the one we want to use another show command just to verify some information about that particular interface. So the show command we're going to use is show running-config, and we're going to specify the interface. So we're going to specify interface, let's spell it right, interface, spell it right, interface gig 0/0. So we're going to use the shortened form of that interface name, gig, or you can use G, 0/0. And it's going to show us information about the running configuration of that particular interface. So notice, just as we expect to see, it currently does not have an IP address assigned to it. It says no IP address. It also says shutdown. Now that's important to note. We'll probably deal with something pertaining to this in a future video, hint, hint. But notice that it's shut down currently, so that that interface is not turned on. That's something to note, especially when troubleshooting. If you configure an interface with an IP address and physically connect it, and you're ready to start communicating with other devices out of this interface and it's not working, when you troubleshoot, just make sure that the interface is actually turned on, and that'll help you a lot out. That'll help you out a lot. When it comes to seeing if everything's working correctly. So we've used our two show commands to verify. So now let's actually get into the steps that are needed to configure the IP address on this interface. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into config mode by typing conf t. And now that we're in configuration mode, we're going to go into interface configuration mode. And to do that, we're going to type in the command interface. We're going to specify the interface that we're working with, specify it as gig 0/0. And now we are into interface configuration mode. Notice the command prompt changed right here to config-if. So we are in configuration mode for the interface itself. We're going to type the command IP space address. And here's the part where we put the actual IP address in. We're going to make it easy on ourselves. We're just going to say 192.168.1.1. And this second part here is important. We have to specify the subnet mask for the subnetwork that this IP address is going to belong to. Now, if you like the CIDR notation, you may just want to put a slash whatever here. But for this configuration, you actually have to write it out the long way. So we're going to use a /24 subnet mask. And written out the long way, that's going to be 255.255.255.0. That's going to put us in a subnet that has 254 usable addresses, and we're actually taking the first usable address, which is the .1 address. And that's the command we want to put in. That's the full command. We're going to hit enter. We're going to come back out into privileged mode by typing our end command. And now we're just going to verify to make sure that this configuration change took. So once again, we're going to type in our show IP interface brief command. And notice for Gigabit Ethernet 0/0, we now have the IP address 192.168.1.1 configured. And if you notice in our method column here, it now says manual. We manually configured that, didn't we? So that's it. Let's run our second show command just to verify what's going on. We're going to do a show run. That's a shortened form of running config. And we're going to specify our interface with int, shortened form of interface. And we're going to specify the interface as gig 0/0. And notice what we now have here. IP address 192.168.1.1 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. That's a /24 subnet mask. It's still shut down, so if we want it to start working for us, we actually have to turn it on. But we've gotten our IP address on our interface, and I think that's all we want to do for this particular video. So that's it. So notice how simple and easy that was. We did do 2 show commands so that we could verify what was actually going on with our interface, and we used those same show commands after we changed the configuration to verify that the change that we wanted to take place took place the way we wanted it to. So that's a good habit to get into, verify before and after, and those commands are key when it comes to troubleshooting, just in case things aren't working the way you want them to later. But it was very easy. Once you get into configuration mode, use the command interface, specify the interface you want to work with, then the command IP space address, and make sure that when you put the IP address in, you also put in the subnet mask as well. That's a requirement for an IP address to be on an interface, especially on a Cisco device. So that's all for this video. Once again, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you don't miss a single thing. I'm JR. This is JR Network Tech. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.